Hello, everybody. It's Nikki Sved here. I'm the Artistic Director of Theatre Alibi, and welcome to Getting Through the Cracks, where we'll be speaking to Justin Audibert, who I'm sure a lot of you know, and is the Artistic Director of the Unicorn Theatre. Before I talk more about that, I'll just give you a little bit of context for the talk itself, or the conversation is probably a better term. We as in Theatre Alibi started these talks off, or it would have been really in the thick of lockdown last year, and at that point it was really as a response to what felt like a real need to be seeing each other and hearing from each other. We'd been going to have a whole conference and seminar looking at children's theatre more broadly during the time we were in lockdown, and that wasn't possible. And so in a way, this was what led to this. And we've been working with a really wonderful PhD researcher. That PhD is now there and present, Elaine Fall, who was looking at the impact of our work, and in many ways it became clear that it was worth having some broader conversations, having looked at that. And so we set up a series of hour-long chats, really, little points of inspiration, talking to people about the work that they were doing. And in a funny way, often, although one gets to see the work of others, you don't always get to really know the nuts and bolts of how they went about making it. And I know from experience that often it's like a sort of fuel for me. You know, it's like I can run on the engine of one of these conversations for a while if somebody just says just the right thing to me at the right time. So the hope is really that by listening to each other talk about the work that we are making and have made, that in a way we just broaden and strengthen the culture of children's theatre in this country. In terms of Theatre Alibi, again, a lot of you will know, but we've been making work since the early 80s, prior to my time, both for young people and for adult audiences as well. And the real heart of the company's work historically has been work that we've taken into schools. So there's been a really rich history of taking work into children in their own environment, not specifically with an educational bent, but as a means of accessing a very broad audience, really going to every person of a particular age in a particular area. It's sort of, schools offer access that almost nothing else does. And also for us, the idea of story and storytelling is absolutely at the heart of our work. And so although we've placed work on big stages, you know, in the West End or in, you know, larger theatres like Oxford Playhouse, for example, the work that we do in schools is approached with absolutely the same respect and skill, and often with the same performers, and if not, it'll be because of people have those specific skills of working in schools and with young people. And we are just beginning a tour now. We kept going into schools right the way through lockdown, and we're just beginning with a new show now that's touring into primary schools in Devon. We'll usually reach about it's slightly less at the moment, but often about 12,000 children each year. And for many of those children, Theatre Alibi will be their first experience of theatre. That's enough about us. Let me tell you about Justin. Justin, are you going to join us? You're going to make yourself visible. Hey, he's here. Hello, Justin. So this is Justin. I'm going to give Justin a little intro, but you can chip in, Justin, if you think there's anything I'm missing out or you'd like to emphasize. So Justin is both a freelance director and the artistic director of the Unicorn Theatre. Some of the things that he's directed include, and we're going to be talking about this, Anansi The Spider at the Unicorn, and also Aesop's Fables at the Unicorn, and Beowulf is another piece that he's done for the Unicorn Theatre. He's worked on Snow in Midsummer at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in the US, The Jumper Factory for the Young Vic, Box of Delights for Wilton's Music Hall, and also Southwark Playhouse, The Cardinal, The Winter's Tale for NT Learning, and lots of other things. He's also directed lots of productions for the RSC, including Taming of the Shrew, Snow in the Midsummer, The Jew of Malta, The Tempest. And for the RSC, he co-wrote and co-presented the BBC live lessons on Shakespeare. So that's a sort of a potted history of Justin. And Justin's going to be talking to us today about his production of Anansi, that started off as a live version, and then, as with so many things that we were dealing with, found its new form during the pandemic. And we thought it would be really interesting to talk about that production and the change that it made, and with a particular view to thinking about what the future is for us, because there have been so many discoveries been made. There have been so many discoveries made through the sort of processes that we've bumped into, I think, along the way over the last year. So we thought it would be useful to unpack a little. And I know that Justin's also got some little bits and pieces that he can show you as well, because it seems it's always difficult with a Zoom call to get a proper handle on the work itself. So hello, Justin.
Hi, Nikki. Hi, everyone as well. Yeah, great to be here. Yeah, really lovely to talk.
What we're going to be doing is that we'll be having a little bit of a chat. And then in the meanwhile, those of you that are listening, there are ways in which you can also ask questions. So there are two ways of getting in touch. So first of all, it would just be lovely to know who's out there and who's there. And if you just want to pop your name and a teeny tiny bit about who you are in the chat, that's also lovely. So we'll just get to see. It's a rare opportunity, particularly at the moment, for us just to be in even a virtual room together. So do say. And at the end, there'll be more chance for you to be exchanging ideas as well. If you have a specific question for Justin, either about what we've been talking about, or it might be that you have thoughts about the unicorn or about the work more broadly, or the notion of digital work, and because that in itself raises many questions, then do pop it onto the Q&A, and then we will get back to you. So Pilar is busily ferreting behind the scenes, and she will get back in touch with you. And then there's the option of either us reading out your question, or else you're welcome to ask it yourself as well. It's lovely to hear your voices. So yes, that's the way of doing things. And just pop a question down when you think of it. But in the meantime, I think Justin and I are going to have a chat. So it would be great, Justin, I think just to hear a little bit about the piece itself, simply why tell the story of Anansi, what was it that really drew you to that story, and also a little bit about at the point at which it was a live performance, how you then approached it.
Yeah, so I have to say, Nikki, that the initial idea of doing a version of Anansi came about completely. It wasn't my idea. Well, it kind of was my idea, but it wasn't my idea. So when I applied for the job at the Unicorn as the artist director, in my interviews, I had talked about the kind of work I would like to make, and I had said, things like, the Anansi stories, they were, they're really important to me. I heard them from my grandparents, and blah blah blah, and all this stuff. And but like everything you say in a job interview, you arrive at an institution and everything's different to how you don't get to just turn up and do whatever you want. But actually, Annalise, who was the executive director at the time, we were struggling for an early years piece, and she was like, well, what about that? Because you talked about it so passionately in your interview, why don't you make that? And I hadn't, to be honest, it had gone out of my head, if I'm purely honest. But the stories as a child had really held me, partly because I think as a character, Anansi is like a child in that he's a spider. They are mischievous, They generally like do things that push the boundaries, that test things, but also they also, like at the end of it, like Anansi tends to learn something or change in some way or adapts, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes the other animals that do, you know. And I kind of loved that thing about it. You know, I was like, oh, it's a very childlike character, so you know, it feels like a really like rich vein to kind of explore. It really interestingly then, so Annalise said, why don't you do that? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So I mean, cracked on it. And I had a feeling that I wanted to devise and then write it myself. And I don't know why, I just kind of knew. I'm not a writer, I would never say I'm a writer, but a couple of things that I later did Marvelous Binoculars, where I just kind of knew that I could do it, like in a way. And I had a brilliant company of actors to do some workshops with. We really went deep in the stories. And what, you know, obviously the thing that became even more fascinating in doing the research was obviously I heard of it from like a Jamaican heritage. And then you realize, oh, this character exists in every single Caribbean island and also in like mainland South and Central America, you know, in Suriname and another, you know, and Guyana. And of course, actually originally originates back in Ghana in West Africa, you know, amongst the Akan people. So it sent me on a real journey all the way through that, which was amazing, you know. And I suppose if there's one thing I love, it's like the kind of things that come from an oral tradition, because that, I feel like theatre slightly ignores the fact that we are really part of that tradition, like finding stories and then slightly rechanging them for the times and reshaping them and da, da, da. And I guess we've got a bit literary about things and like, oh, you know, we write things down and da, da, da. But we're just part of that tradition. And I kind of love that that tradition goes back thousands of years, since people sat around the camp, you know, a fire for the first time. That's what they did, because they were like, oh, we can keep warm now. What do we do? Let's tell each other a story. And so I, you know, I loved going on that dive and then finding all about the Ghanaian tradition and so on and so forth, and the Akan people, and you know, I just absolutely adored going on it. So which was really fun, and on that journey with the designer Shadisa Greenwood Bailey, you know, we went deep into that. It was really interesting, like, and fun thing to do. And I guess it came to us that we chose the stories we wanted to do, which were Anansi and the Pot of Wisdom, Brother Anansi and Brother Snake, and Anansi and the Two Dinners. And within that, we were like, okay, well, why don't we try and tell the story of how these stories came here to the UK? And so there's a chronology to the original stage show. The story starts in Ghana, then it goes to the Caribbean, and then it comes to London. And that was the kind of journey that we did. And we were like, well, what, you know, going back to that idea of how do you tell a story start, how will these stories first? So we were really interested in the idea that you sit under a tree, and Nancy's all about trees, etc., etc. And so that was the kind of world that we did, and the audience, the young people, came and sat under a tree, and they heard these stories. There were seats at the back for those who could not sit on the floor. We did get lots of messages about sore bums, you know, and that was kind of how it was realized. And it was one of those where, I mean, brilliant. The cast were just fab. Who were the cast also who did the digital show? Absolutely fab. And it was one of those rare shows you get where the audiences really like it, the team at the Unigrom really likes it, and the critics really like it. So it's lovely when you get that. Doesn't happen very often, but it's very nice when you do. What we've also realized is that, you know, actually there's not a huge amount of work being made for a year that it has a kind of more global perspective on it in some ways. And so that took fire, and we really started to get a lot of interest from communities that sometimes even, you know, like that families that don't come generally, and so on and so forth. So that was also really exciting. Yes. So does that answer the question?
I think it does. I think the only thing that I wonder about in all of that, it sounds like such rich work for such a variety of reasons. I mean, partly simply character, you know, and just and I always really love it when it doesn't necessarily have to be a child at the center, but there is something that is very easy for that to grasp. Yeah. And also culturally, just, I mean, enormously rich. I'm interested because I often bump into with stories from an oral tradition. You're undoubtedly dealing with stories that are of another time, and sometimes are dealing with things that feel perhaps a little conservative as well. But I wonder what it was in the. I don't say that specifically about Anansi. I say, about stories of a European tradition often. And I wondered what it was in the heart of the stories that really caught you. Was there something about narrative and story that just allows you to see the world a little more clearly? And so you need things that are really resonant, don't you? And I wondered what it was you saw in the selection of the three that you had.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So like the character changes through time. Like, so one of the things we discovered was on the different Caribbean islands, he becomes more a symbol of rebellion. Like in West Africa, he's slightly more a symbol of like mischief and generally being a naughty so and so, whereas actually he becomes a symbol of rebellion in the Caribbean. And then it became really interesting as to like, what does that mean then if you go to contemporary Britain and that representation in contemporary Britain? And actually that gave us like a kind of journey through. I say this now, like I didn't know any of this setting out. Like this is just stuff that as stuff came up, we were like, oh, there's another thing, like that's interesting. And it became, but I set off partly because of what you say, which is actually he's not a black and white thing. Like sometimes Anansi's Anansi acts in the benefit of others, and sometimes he's a totally selfish so-and-so. And like that was really interesting to me because children are like that. I have a 3.5-year-old, and she can literally be the sweetest kid ever and like see another kid and share and so on and so forth. And of course, sometimes she'll like take 10 balloons off all the other children, and like that. Children are very like that. They are capable of both those things, and I could see that in this character, which I just really loved.
Oh, but also a little bit of anarchy. I so think that's not a bad thing at the minute. If you're looking at education and power and the possibility of change as well, it feels exciting to be looking at stories about somebody that doesn't toe the line.
Yeah, totally.
And then of course, so you had this piece and that was working well and was popular in all sorts of ways. And then of course, the pandemic hit, and of course we all responded to that in a variety of ways. But I know for you there was a sense of real urgency in terms of what you did, and that am I right in saying that your focus quite quickly turned to this piece and how you might be able to make that accessible within that period of time? Yeah,
so again, I wouldn't say this was, again, it was not my idea, which my then incoming executive director Bailey, we were sat as a team, as a senior leadership team, we all brainstorming, what do we do, how do we respond, what do we make, and bear in mind this was in like lockdown. When I say we sat in a room, we didn't sit in a room, we sat in a virtual room. This was in extreme lockdown. You were not allowed to leave your house. This is like April, March, April of pandemic year. So we couldn't, and how do we, and I guess part of what happened was we felt as a team, it was better to do something that we knew and had a framework and so on and so forth. So I guess that came into it. And then it did feel made more sense rather than putting pressure on another artist in that moment. And, they did, whether this is right or wrong, I don't know. And I hope that in the rest of the digital work we did provide opportunities for other freelance artists. But in that moment, it felt like this could all go wrong. It's better if it all goes wrong with me than it all goes wrong with somebody else. And in a way, it was kind of led a bit by that. And so when we made the piece, actually, I think we struck upon two things that were really beneficial to us. One was that company were brilliant and great and very patient. And the other one was that we partnered with a company called Illuminations who make work, who specialize in theatrical work on TV and film. So those two things were really advantageous. And so the pieces were made with the company. Essentially, we sent them. This is when you had to send everything like via Uber, and you couldn't get in it and leave it on doorsteps. It was bonkers. We sent them like tripods and camera, just iPhones, not like anything fancier than that. Like in taxis with props and costume and stuff like that, in taxis around London, which was crazy. And then the cast had to like set up the shots, and then they would like WhatsApp it to me and Todd, who was the editor, but he kind of was the DOP really. And we would be watching it and on Zoom telling them, no, change it like that. And then they'd send it back and so on and so forth. And of course, you're just learning all the time. I think all of us, none of us really knew what we were doing. And Lucy, the movement director, and so we're all doing it that way in that kind of iterative process. But in a way, I think that was kind of I think in a funny way, like that really helped us develop a language. And actually, when we released the digital films, we released them in a different order because we didn't crack it on the first film, Anansi and the Pot of Wisdom. We had to kind of go back and look at that again. And we kind of realized when we filmed Brother Anansi and Brother Snake that actually we cracked a style here. So let's like do that and then go back to the other one, if that makes sense. So
yes,
totally. The digital is not in chronological order, whereas the stage show was in chronological order. But I actually ended up probably my favorite of them is actually weirdly the Brother Anansi and the Pot of Wisdom, but it wasn't when we filmed it because of me, not because of everybody else, because of the things I didn't quite understand. Whereas once I understood a language, a theatrical language for the film, it made a lot more sense to me.
Yes. Oh, I mean, we were all having to learn so fast on our feet, weren't we? No bad thing, I don't think. I mean, there are good things about that. I mean, it would be lovely to interrogate that a little bit further about, you're obviously talking about your learning process throughout, and it would be really good to get a sense of some of the things that you were picking up from that. Where did you feel that you were making decisions that weren't quite working at the beginning, for example, and where did they become? Yes. What did you learn?
Yeah, so I guess it goes to what like we wanted to do, because obviously so I did a thing for National which showed that I am, and then it cancelled, and it was like make a piece. With that, I made a film, like a short film. It was purely a film. I'm very pleased with it, but it was purely film. Weirdly made the same way with like iPhones and like no other humans, but it was a film, and I didn't want to make a film for this. It felt really important that we made something that I would say was digital theatre. Whether we succeeded, I don't know, but that's the intention. And I suppose.
And what do you mean by digital theatre? It would be really good to get an understanding of how because we will all have been, so making those definitions for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. So what was important to us, a sense of theatre? So one is like a sense of a shared live occasion. And I'll talk about that. I don't necessarily think we succeeded in that, but I'll talk about what we did a little bit. The second one was a very direct relationship with the audience. And I think that was another reason why Anansi worked as an idea, because it already had that in the play, so in the piece of theatre, so it felt like it could translate. So those two things really, a kind of a direct relationship with the audience and a kind of sense of like doing a thing together in a room at the same time. And we weirdly didn't, I don't think, achieve the first, but I kind of think we got some way towards the second. And I suppose not a direct relation to the audience, and also a sense of like non-naturalism in its design, in its aesthetic. It's just a thing that encourages you to suspend your disbelief, but it's built into the fabric of it, not like, so that felt really important. Is it worth showing a bit now, Nikki? Does that make sense?
Yes, do you want to show us a bit? I think that would be really useful, because it's hard for us to imagine. I think that would be great. Yeah, pick your moment, Justin.
Okay, so I'm just going to show you the first little tiny bit. I do like a minute, I think, of it, just because it gives you a little sense of that. Obviously, everybody bear with us. Hopefully, technologically, this is going to be the smoothest thing since, I don't know, a cashmere scarf, but who knows whether it will be. Okay, share screen.
Great.
I am brother Anansi, Anansi, come and join me. I'm having a feast tonight. I am brother Anansi. I am brother Anansi, come and join me. I'm having a feast tonight. Once upon a time, when the rains would not fall, and the fruit on the trees dried up, all the animals grew fearful. Did you hear?
Did you hear? Did you hear?
Hear what?
Did you hear?
Hear what?
Did you hear?
Hear what?
About the famine.
The famine.
Did that work?
Thanks, Justin. Yes, I mean, it was a little bit laggy, but I think that we got a broad sense of it, and that the sense of a split screen, and also it's interesting as you were talking about what is inherently theatrical, because I think it often brings me back to storytelling, where you're very clearly talking to an audience, and you can see the relationship between the performer, the audience, and the material itself, and you can sort of see that in the little clip that you showed us.
Yeah, so I mean, the kind of split screen thing, yeah, and that came like late. You know, the interesting thing is you're adding another. The impulse is, how do you make something? Obviously, I don't have a million actors to be all the animals. You know, not that I didn't have that in a stage show either. You know, but so it's like we could do fun things with the editing that makes you go, oh, I see. You know, and then looking at angles of people talking to each other and so on and so forth. Great, yes, brilliant, thank you. In the chat I've just seen, yeah, sorry it was laggy, but it gives you a sense. And again, that thing of like you know, storytelling straight to camera, and again, going back to, it became apparent, and we see this in a clip I'm going to show you later, that like thinking about the frame, the frame as a thing that you can cut up and divide and use in different ways, again, clearly naturalistic, like at all in any way, shape or form. You're saying straight away, well, this is going to be different. Nikki and I had a chat the other day, and I think this is probably this was definitely some of the references that were going on in my head. Was I was thinking about when I was young and children's television when I was young, and weirdly I would say the references are more from children's television and from straight film, because I think back to things like You and Me, which had, again, that very direct relationship to the audience. I suppose Sesame Street does as well. Like, you know, and I guess that world was more the world that I was seeking to kind of explore than a filmic world. Does that make sense?
It totally does. In fact, when you were talking about it the other day, it made me think of Finger Bobs. I can't remember the name of the presenter who's just died, but I was quite surprised watching that little clip again, that it began with him saying he takes his finger and he puts it's all very, very clear about the making of the piece of theatre. It's very open, or the program. It's not dissimilar. Yes, I can totally see why the inspiration would come from some really high quality children's theatre that might be of a particular era as well. People are going to be searching online.
Yeah, I was like, well, I'm 40, so none of my audience are going to have seen that stuff. Brilliant.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And it's not, I mean, there are lots of things that are hard about it. You said that the sense of liveness was the thing that was hard, and that you're not sure how much you managed to actually
totally
catch that.
Yeah, so we did a thing which was we were like, right, we want to just tell people it's going to be on, each one's going to be on at a specific time, and you can watch it with other people watching it at the same time. So we did a thing on YouTube called YouTube Premiere. Oh, I think it's really worth saying that we were in a position, we made a decision early on, and we were in a position, thanks to very generous funding by the Backstage Trust and Bloomberg, to do it all and put it out for free. You know, so this does change how you do something. So we put it on YouTube because we could be free with it, and with The Guardian, and so we basically launched each one on a Saturday, consecutive Saturdays. I think it was at 11 o'clock each one. And don't get me wrong, it was kind of nice because it had like a countdown, like the hour before it did like a countdowny thing on YouTube and so on and so forth. It's coming soon, and then but obviously, and actually, we got like 500 on the first one. I don't remember the numbers for the second. We got like 500. But obviously, that nothing, I think things that require ticketing and that kind of stuff. And like later on, we did a show with Tim Crouch, I Sinner, which we ticketed and which was actually live, and Tim did it live with the audience. That was much more about the live experience. Like, I don't think we achieved that with Anansi, but it was kind of interesting that we were thinking about it. And I don't regret the fact we tried to do that. I don't think it quite worked. I think the big things for us, the Guardian partnership was great because that got it to lots of people. And then we got onto YouTube Kids, which is basically curated YouTube, and that had a huge impact on the viewing of it. Really, like that skyrocketed the viewing of it. So yeah, thanks YouTube Kids.
I mean, the actual your numbers were incredibly high by the end of it. I mean, you reached around 500,000 children with that work. So I mean, it is extraordinary. It's hard, isn't it, not to be aware of the tension between liveness and access in terms of numbers, just purely in terms of numbers. So we also did do digital work for schools, and that was live, and it was very particularly shaped to. That piece was shaped for specific schools. So the actor was talking about the name of the school, the name of the teacher. There was a part of the piece that was interactive, using Padlet. And that was probably going to 60 children at a time, though. So it's much more. It's much smaller, basically. I wonder how easy it is to do it for larger numbers.
Yeah.
And you sort of make your choices, don't you, in the end?
You do, and I think what you did obviously must have felt incredibly special and personal to those groups, which is in that moment when when we think, aside from the art, and we think how we were feeling as human beings, like being able to feel special and that's huge in that moment. That's really like blimey, it was so tough, wasn't it? So anything that can make people feel special in that way. And I mean, I think a thing with Tim had that, differently. People felt special in a different way, but yeah, I think that's an element of interactivity in that way is absolutely gorgeous. You can't achieve it with everything, and it is a question of like depth and breadth, which that's fair.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's interesting, and there are things that we're all juggling with, aren't they, as well? I'll just remind people that if you'd like to put a question to Justin, do just pop one into the Q&A, or if it finds its way onto the chat, nothing terrible is going to happen, but the Q&A might be the most direct route. Do just pop anything down that you think of, and we'd be delighted to ask your put your questions to Justin. I was thinking about whether you had any questions for yourselves in terms of access via digital. Because another thing that we found that we were doing was that we put a lot, we put a lot out digitally, and then began to feel quite aware of of digital poverty as well, and how you. So in the end, we also put work out via food banks actually as well. So and tried to put some work out in a way that didn't require anything, but we also thought very carefully about the means by which young people could access work, because it was often the case that children were they were sharing a phone in one phone in a house. I mean that's if they had that. So did you have any concerns about that?
Yes, I mean you raise a hugely important point, and it as I'm sure the pandemic highlighted the inequities that are already prevalent in society in a terrible way. so we later on we did another project, which we did kind of a co-creational kind of project in schools, and with that we did everything. Although it was going to eventually be a digital thing, we did everything old, color, like in that style. I guess we did speak to quite a few schools, and we talked about, like, we didn't feel like we were the best people to be ensuring digital access. Like, we had lots of conversations with schools about how they're ensuring digital access, and then they were obviously much more au fait with it. But I mean, what you're saying is really right, Nikki, that like it's a huge thing. I suppose the counterpoint to that is there are people who often struggle because of other access needs to go to the theatre, who suddenly were able to see everything that was possibly being made. So it's kind of it's a slight swing, not swings and roundabouts, not the right term, but there's that other side to it. I mean, in terms of going forward as an organization, we are quite keen to keep making a strand of digital work. And the reasons for that are because we can reach people who are outside of London, or outside places we tour to. And with touring is realistically going to be difficult in the next few years for us. We can reach people outside London, we can reach people all over the world, which is even cooler. And actually, as we've gone on, we've got much better at embedding access to our digital work. So Anansi just had subtitles, which is fine, but like later work had audio description alongside it. It had, and like in more embedded forms of access. The other thing, which did feel really great for us and was obvious in hindsight, but not obvious at the time, was teachers saying to us, look, we can use this work to teach with. We can use it in the morning, then we can teach, then we can come back to it in the afternoon. And that is so obvious, but actually they can't do that when they bring children to the unicorn. Like, and then, they can't do that, but we can't do that. This was really exciting for us and really brilliant because it gets watched loads and loads, it gets used loads and loads. You can build lots around it. It will never take the place of live people in the auditorium. I do not think that, but I do think that aspect of it and how it can be aiding a creative curriculum is really important and really interesting moving forward as we go forward. The other thing that was my favorite thing that happened was one of the teachers saying to us, actually, when we did this piece of work, and then one of our children watched it at home with their parents, and then their parents loved watching it, and they watched it again a few times and so on and so forth, and talked to us about it. And they were like, we would never before have got those parents to come to the trip to the theatre with us, and now they want to come to the trip to the theatre with us. And that feels, if we can, now that's one example. So look, that's not, I don't know how much that's happening, but that made me really excited because I was like, wow, if you can use it in that way to go, oh, okay, theatre can be for me because it's a story from a culture I understand or I'm part of, or blah, blah, blah. That's really amazing. Like, that's one example. I don't know like how prevalent that was, but that definitely made me really happy because I was like, oh, okay, this could be a thing.
I'm absolutely sure that was happening. And similarly, I think we got similar feedback from parents who we wouldn't usually have come into contact with, because actually, although I think that the work that we do in schools is probably the work that is closest to my heart, one of the problems with it is that it's largely invisible outside of the school walls. Yeah. And so if you can cross that, then that's really wonderful. I think I was mentioning to you that even I think what we almost learned from the digital experience was the importance of that. And so now the current show we're doing in schools, we've made really sure that there's an aspect of it that happens in the school playground as the parents are coming to pick the children up. So I mean, there are ways of doing that live, but I think, well, you wouldn't have reached 500,000 children basically either. How could you have done that otherwise? Yeah. You are, and in all sorts of places as well. I think we would talk as well about the fact that you can reach children who couldn't otherwise see it, like for example in hospitals, and And also that there are things like alongside the audio description, like the increased contrast that schools can use. And even with the live piece, actually, the fact that we were giving the schools a recording of the live piece meant that they could revisit it and sort of relive it as well. There's something about seeing things again, but it is problematic.
This is a theatre thing, because we crave the new all the time, people that work in theatre. What you got to remember is, like, children love watching a thing over and over again. Like my daughter, she is not bored of watching Moana yet. So there's an interesting thing there, that we as an industry are geared to always the new thing. But actually, particularly if working theatre for young audiences, our audiences change like every year anyway. So it's new to them, like, but also people do love repetition, and that is a thing. Like, that is a huge thing. I just can see, Nikki, there's a comment. A
lovely comment. Have you seen it? Shall I read it out, just so that you don't have to compliment yourself? Which is, this is from Karen Goddard. Thank you, Karen. More of a comment than a question. So Karen saw the live version. When I saw the live version, I was wowed by the beautiful design. Obviously, set and costume design was a really important element with a decent budget. So this is so great. Work for children and young people deserves high production values. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Karen. I was going to just use that to springboard into then, like, I agree. I mean, what I did love having the tree. I missed my tree. So I was going to use that to springboard into showing you how you kind of like, okay, so when you came into the theatre, you had this great big tree to sit under. We cannot do that. So what do you do? Now, I'm not saying we got this right, but I'm just going to show a little clip that goes like, this is how we did our tree. Does that make sense?
That would be great.
Right.
Yeah, let's give it a go. It was, what happened last time was it was a little bit laggy at the beginning, and then it sort of caught up with itself.
Okay, let's see what it does this time. Oh, wait, I've got to do that first. Ooh. Okay. Forgive the technical ineptitude. 1 second. I think I've got the right thing now. Okay.
One animal. Anansi, the trickster spider.
The cleverest animal of them all.
Saw what Nyame had done and had a very clever idea.
He would secretly collect all of the wisdom in a huge cooking pot,
So that he could keep it for himself.
He set about gathering up all of the precious wisdom.
And when he had collected every last bit of it, he looked for a place he could keep it safe.
he searched in the darkest caves.
But he worried that the grumpy bears who live there might find it.
He ventured to the great lake.
But he knew that the cunning crocodile might discover it and keep it for himself.
He scaled the tall mountain.
But he could see that the beady eagles were eyeing his pot jealously.
So he went deep, deep, deep into the bush.
And there he saw a tall, wide thorn tree. And he thought to himself, this is perfect. No one will be able to get the pot of wisdom from the embrace of the prickly thorns at the top of the tree.
So he strapped the pot to his front and carefully began to climb.
And Nancy grew more I'm more frustrated climbing the tree.
Oh, stupid book, huh?
Help me, huh?
He stole.
I don't know how laggy that was. How laggy was it?
No,
right?
that was good, actually. That was fine. There was a little bit of lag, but you could definitely get the meaning from it here, and the sound was very clear. So you were you working with a designer who was researching images that you were placing beside
Yeah, it was a new collaboration in a way. So it worked like this. Shadisa, who was the original designer, worked with, obviously the costumes were the same costumes and the props, we'd use the same props. And then one of the things that became clear from watching the first set of rushes was actually like just a white back. Obviously these were filmed in the actors' flats or houses or wherever they lived, so all we had was a white wall, and it became apparent that you couldn't just spend all your time watching actors on a white wall. So Shadisha and I realized that what we needed was frames, so we put in these kind of frames all through it, and then Shadisha chose all the color palettes for that. But actually then working with Todd, the editor, it became really clear to me that I wanted another layer, well, actually 2 layers really. One was I was kind of interested in some shots that were, found footage that, did things like the swoop into the jungle and stuff like that, which you could do. And then also then a layer of really simple, playful illustration, which is what those, like the crocodile and the eagle's wings, other animals felt like they could live in a world of really simple illustration. And again, it goes back to, obviously I could do like, I didn't mind the backgrounds being kind of stock footage, but I didn't really want the animals to be like that. There was, because Anansi is not that, it felt really important that we did something theatrical or non-naturalistic with the other animals. So that's why they're, illustration. I mean, I happen to be blessed that Todd McDonald, who did the editing, is an absolute wizard and can do a million things. And so he drew those. And
gosh.
Yeah, he drew them. Yeah, crazy. I was like, Todd, how's your drawing? I literally said that to him one day. He was like, oh, it's all right, I don't know. Draw me that. And he drew me this thing. I was like, oh, that's good. So and it was about that thing. And again, I think again in my head, it was like, collage is fun. Collage is a thing young people understand and relate to quite a lot. And collage is another way that it just takes it out of the realm. Weirdly, the reference for that was, I don't know if any of you know the film A Scanner Darkly, which is like a whole film made in like rotoscoping. And that was kind of the film. I was like, Todd, have you seen A Scanner Darkly? I think it should be a bit like that. And so Todd was like, yes, I've seen that. And that was the kind of inspiration. Again, I suppose, when we did Marvin's Binoculars, I was like, Todd, the reference is Dogville. Not that the content is Dogville, but again, like a film that is overtly theatrical in its nature. And again, A Scanner Darkly is that thing. The film has that non-naturalistic element. And I guess that's what I was trying to take inspiration from, if that makes sense, Nikki.
Yeah, it totally does.
Dogville, yes, Jeannie, Dogville.
Yes, no, I like that, and I like the I often enjoy adult references. I think it's really interesting, particularly when you're working with storytelling, that there's a real connection. I often talk about which way is the camera pointing when I'm working with live actors in the room, because when you've got an actor as a storyteller, they can show you a close-up of a face or things at scale, or you can look at things in a particular direction because they're hopping in and out of the action. And actually it's not a big jump often to making those choices that you were making. I've got another question from Annie, who says, I think it's really exciting to see so much digital work and companies adapting to the new, inverted commas, COVID world. But are you nervous for the future of theatre, that this may become the new norm? I think you've sort of hinted at the contradictions there, and it would be good to know what you feel about that, and whether actually there's in some way that this work is actually threatening live work.
It's a really good question, Annie, and I obviously do not know the answer. My instinct, and this is instinct, not known thing. So we then did Anansi at Regent's Park in the summer. When we all thought the pandemic would be over soon, that bit of time. This summer, not last summer, this summer. And all I can say is we did it at Regent's Park, and the show sold out, and then we got increased capacity, and the show sold out again. So I think in some ways it can be a driver of, I think people still want the live thing. Like, I just think people will want the live thing. That said, to say that I am worried is like, it's literally what keeps me up at night. I'm so worried about this Christmas, because I do think if you think of the population as a whole, the number one time people go to the theatre by enormous time is at Christmas. And I think if you miss it once, the next year you're really looking forward to something. If you miss it twice, I think you lose people, and that worries me hugely. So it's two. I think one is that digital work can drive audiences, but I do have real worries about this Christmas. It's scary. Like I have literally got stomach ulcers because of worrying about it.
But actually, it sounds as though your worries are, in a way, they're separate from whether digital work is driving audiences or encouraging audiences to do other things. It's to do with all of the other pressures that are on us.
Yeah. Also, I do think it's about habituality. Like, I think we live in a fast-paced, small attention span world. I don't have a problem with, like, by the way, lots of people go on and on about that. I don't have a problem with that necessarily. There's kind of interesting things about that. But I do worry about losing that enormous tradition that we have, of people going to watch shows over the festive season, because I think that's like the gateway into then watching theatre more and more. I can only talk for myself. The kind of seminal things when I was a child were like going to the Christmas panto or musical that we would go to, and then going on your birthday as a treat, and like those things, and losing those is complicated,
because that's very fundamental. If it's that on one hand and nothing, that is, it's very key.
You're not going to watch a piece of digital theatre for your birthday. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, let's be honest, you're not going to be like, Mum, can I have, Dad, can I, no, of course you're not. Like, but where I do have, like I said, have real hope is what it does in the creative curriculum and for teachers and in schools. That makes me really excited as well. Like, and when I think about all the things that I don't even understand, like AR and VR and all, like the possibilities there, I'd seem endless to me. I don't understand them, but
I think for a lot of us, the sense that we don't know yet is quite important. Just the little exploration that the journey that we're on is good. I don't like the word journey, but anyway, it's important. And actually, I wouldn't have even started walking down that path if it hadn't been forced upon me. And it's probably, I feel like I've had to eat some humble pie.
100%, exactly the same. There's no, I cannot tell you the number of times I have had conversations with people going, "What's your digital strategy?" and me being like, "Digital strategy? I can't even get like my normal strategy straight." And then the pandemic made me make one, and what made us, sorry, not me, and I'm really pleased with like now I understand it.
Or we're at least at the beginning of that path. I've got two questions that I'd really like to ask. One is from Ruth. I didn't see the live version of Anansi, sadly, but enjoyed the digital version in the first lockdown with my then 1-year-old. He particularly loved the music and enjoyed dancing along with the performers. Did you have to make any adaptations to the original live theatre show's music to make it work in the editing process? Did the actors have any recordings to work with when they made their own recorded performance? It's so hard performing one part of a musical ensemble.
Yeah. Your last sentence is 100% true. No, we didn't. We kind of kept, Damani added some stuff, but we essentially kept sorry, I'm getting sunned. We essentially kept the songs as they are in the live show. They are the same songs. I'm really delighted your 1-year-old danced along to them. I have a mixture of people going, we love them, and I can't get them out of my head, and they drove me mad, and my children keep singing them. So I've had it both ends. but what's brilliant is in film, cutting to the music is so useful for the editor. So in a way, it was a huge boon. Like, I think recording it for the cast, having to all do it in isolation with listening to each other's harmonies and trying to pick them. And I mean, they're honestly, those three are they're just they're amazing. Like, yeah, the patience they had in that thing, and I'm not able to help at all. And Duramani, the composer, really did help them a lot as well. But yeah, that was hugely challenging in those circumstances. But yeah,
oh, it's so gratifying to work with a close team, even when you're not together, to feel that is possible. And brilliant that you'd worked together before all of this probably must have made a big.
It would have, you would have. So with the best will in the world, and however nice you all are, somebody would have lost their rag, like, because it was just challenging. And sometimes like people's talking about digital property, like amongst the company, like internets went down, downloading things and then sending them, all of that stuff it was a nightmare,
so all those frustrations
took people.
This is quite a big question to ask right at the end, but I'd be really interested to know just the simple fact that as the Unicorn Theatre, you were able to reach 500,000 children, you were able to make that partnership with The Guardian. It's an indication of the real significance and the sort of flagship, in a way, that the Unicorn is. And I wonder how you, as artistic director, hold that in terms of the responsibility it gives you. But I suppose I'm talking particularly in relation to the industry as a whole, and particularly within the UK. So do you have thoughts on that?
So yes, I think I've already do. Well, I have. So I've now been doing this job for 3.5 years, but in lots of ways, really the pandemic just gave me the time to think about how I want to do the job, which you don't really get, actually, weirdly. And that's the one thing it did give. It gave time to think about that. And I suppose the other thing I would say to that is nothing has become more apparent, I would say, in the pandemic than the slightly in theatre, and this is how it's kind of set up, is that every theatre has to have its own identity, its own thing, and you will slightly compete against each other. And nothing has been shown to be more silly than that by the pandemic, because actually it's all about how you can collaborate with each other. That makes everything better and everything go further and be stronger and more interesting. And that doesn't have to negate your own identity as an organization or so on and so forth. But the pandemic has really shown that up, that actually, like, we're all better off working together. And of course, like, you're going to share some taste and some sensibility with some people and not with others and so on and so forth. It's not like everyone with everyone, but actually talking and helping out and like being able to do things to support your other colleagues and to support their organizations. And at the end of the day, all we really all want is like people to go and have the absolutely transcendental experience of watching live theatre in a place, like that's what we actually care about. So we have one big shared goal. How we get there is fine, and that might be different, but just having that in your mind feels really important. And
yes, I agree. And partly partly these talks are exactly that. Have you got a sense of the real nuts and bolts, the practical ways in which the Unicorn might be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking, so in the next season I'm looking to show, like, I think the thing that we have is we can showcase work in London, which is advantageous in some ways. So I'm looking to do a bit more of that. I suppose, in terms of, like, I think we were pretty good. Like, if people go, can you help us with space and stuff like that? We have tried over the years to do that. You can't always do it, of course, because you're making things yourself. I hope that my phone and email and stuff is available to people in the industry who just kind of got questions. Like, I hope I'm accessible in that way. Like, I have tried to be. And like, yeah, and trying to support people by the things that they're doing as well, initiatives that they're running, like getting through the cracks and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, like, that's, yeah. I don't know, like, we're in everybody is the expert on their own audiences, like, and I really think that, like, I think that deeply, you know, people know who their audience are, well, who run theaters, so I would never tell anybody else about that. I suppose the one thing that I'm really passionate about is not that other people in the industry aren't, you know, obviously changing the makeup of who makes work and for young audiences and why and how, and the stories they're telling is really key. That's kind of why I want to do the job. So that element, but it's not like loads of my colleagues aren't also doing that. It's just like, that's the thing that drives me a lot. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, really important stuff. And yeah, and I'm sure your voice is a really important one in terms of representing the industry as well. I thank you so much for that. It's been really fascinating and just lovely to be let into the world of another making process as well, and really useful to be able to see sort of glimpses of the work itself. And I really look forward to seeing the work that you make following on from that as well, and seeing how the sort of the seeds have been planted through this. It's exciting stuff. Let me tell you all a little bit about the next talk that will be happening towards the end of November, which is on the 25th of November, again between 1 and 2. And that's Camilla Bauer, who's the artistic director, and Pedro Linares, who's the lighting designer from Projeto Gompa, who are a Brazilian company. And that piece will be facilitated by Louise Catarega, who did such a lovely job with Barrowland last time. And Camilla and Pedro are going to be talking about the artistic project behind Little Red Riding Hood, which is their own show, and will be delving into and analysing the complex emotions explored in the piece. I think there was quite a lot of real psychological work that was being done looking at that, you can imagine, with Little Red Riding Hood. So I hope to see you there. And then also, if you take a careful look at the chat, I think that Hattie is going to pop in a link to a Padlet. So that just means that those of you who have been listening can pop any more questions that you have down there. Here you go, there's the Padlet link. And also chat to each other as well, again, just so you know who's been there, and see if there's anything else on there. And you'll also see Pat and Hattie will be in touch with links to the work that Justin so kindly talked about as well. So yes, thank you all very much for joining us, and thank you enormously to Justin. See you again.